Okay, it's going to be real quick today. These are the walls that we see all around the earth, really, that are matched up so perfectly in these crazy looking shapes, and they can't figure out how that happened. Well, here's how it happened. And by the way, look at this very carefully, this right here. Look at the colors and look at the textures. And then this is completely different. And the same thing with that up there. Look at that very carefully. Because most of these are nice clear stones, you see? Nice, really nice ones up here. Now all of them, well not all of them, but a lot of them have those little bumps. I can tell you what those are too. And this is another one that has this red and black and kind of looks like it's starting to rot away. Now, why does these have that and the other ones don't? Okay, my contention is that these things were cut when they were wet, and this whole mountain here was wet. And there was some kind of a machine that was driven here. Now, let's look closely. And this has freaked me out when I started to really think about it. You see this here, between here and here, is these little tank tread looking things that are grippers and so forth, and also they're stabilizers not to go back and forth. And I think this had a thing that cut the slabs over here, and then I don't know how they moved them, but I think this was a machine that was designed to do this cutting. Right? Now, how can I say that with any kind of thought behind it? Because it's obviously sunk in here. Everything here was wet at the same time. These were wet too. These were put in those walls and they settled down, so, you know, however they cut them, it didn't matter. They cut little pieces like that, cut big slabs, little slabs, and they slammed them together and they just fit together. Now, you see how this is a little curved here, a little bit, curved, every here and there, you see that? And I could see these things are moved over a little bit. That to me would be this digging, because it's still wet. Now you're going to have some forces, and I think that might be what those forces are, and that's what created these little divots and curves and so forth. And I understand this right now, 100% I understand, is biology. And this is the mineralization that happens in tendon, or not necessarily tendon, but membranes and tendons too. It's muscle, the whole 9 yards. Now, what this was, I'm not sure. But it was biological. To that, I'm certain. And they could test this. Now, here's the thing that really freaked me out. First of all, this goes back thousands of years. Secondly, it's a machine. Duh. Thirdly, it's been cutting these slabs. The other thing is that this was the slabs that they cut. Sometimes they had biological, bone and so forth in them, which I showed you before in the other picture. Now, sometimes they're nice and clear and absolutely flawlessly perfect. Now, how did this thing get here? When I saw it for a couple of years now, I just thought, oh, they just drove up here. No, they didn't drive here. Some dropped this here. How did they didn't get here? This was wet. The tires here, and the tires go up to here. It looks like they locked it in maybe with something so that it wouldn't come running down here. But I can't see any way they could have got it to here without bringing it down and dropping it. That's the only thing I can say. All right, you see this material? It was driven over wet. Now, this is a tendon, and that's the abrupt transition of a tendon, and it's turned into selenite because of the conditions that it was in. And this is the exact same stuff as this. This is mineralization with blood and mineralized tissue in it, which creates kind of a bonding effect, and that's what they're looking at here. But that's what this is, and that was a tendon. It's selenite now. You can see right through it. And that's because of the conditions that it was in when it was wet and entombed in a wet condition for a very long time. And it's what's called nucleophilic substitution, the things that were in the moisture. And I'm not exactly sure what it was, but it was, I believe this is fluorine and so forth, bonds with it instead of well, a lot of times this is CaCO3, CaCO3, calcium carbonate, limestone. But if it's in a different chemistry invading it, it turns into selenite. And at other times it can invade it and turn into basalt. It's always whatever invades it. See, that's what people don't understand. They think a tin is always going to turn into a basalt or limestone. No. Depends on what it was entombed in. Very, very important. They have to understand nucleophilic substitution. And then, of course, you got to understand chemistry, the transition metals, and what bonds to what, and what strips electrons out, and what pushes them in, and that sort of stuff. I've done this for a very long time, and I've been into chemistry for 50 years, so I understand a lot of it that people just sort of missed. And things, I know I've shown it as a bazillion times. There he goes with the goose again. That's a goose. There's a goose's feathers. And this is, it transitioned into stone based on the fact that it was in a wet environment. And this is where it was flat on the wet side. It's like that. And then the neck came down like this and out that way, and it just snapped off. And if you look at it carefully and you know what to look for, you can see the signs of what the neck architecture was in the throat and so forth. But anyway, I have a ton of this stuff, and this is what happens to them in the mud fossil process. That's a complete bone with the cartilage and all of the little spots and the, ligament indentations, and the marrow is in here and everything. And this could be easily tested now. Things are much different than when I started. I was basically the first one in the world that I know of that had ancient DNA tested in a serious way, and mine were from giant human beings, and that made these people go crazy. So anyway, this is biology. I'm sorry, that's just the nature of what we're looking at. There was creatures here with giant machines doing these constructions, and and the funny thing is, Brian Forrester goes all around the world. Very, very good guy. Does a lot of work, asks a lot of questions. So I'm trying to correspond with him. And I said to him, what do you think about this? And you know what he said? The funny thing was, he said, it looks like an airship. And I'm thinking, how would he come up with an airship? And then I thought, wow, somebody must have dropped it there. Because, I never thought about any airship. I don't know if that's what he meant, that somebody dropped it there or not, but that's what I started to think. Wow, there was no tracks getting it. So it was very, very interesting. These creatures were really good size. Now, look at Petra. That's muscle fibers. These are the connective tissues. These are actually sarcomeres. You see these little fibrils and these blocks. Those are what they call sarcomeres. I'm telling you, go to somebody who knows what they're talking about, an anatomist, they'll tell you what it is. And this was carved out of wet flesh, just like the machine sitting in there. They put these little holes in there to let the moisture out. And you can see that the same, you see it carry across here? They didn't build this in there. They just carved it out of what was here. And inside this, what they call a treasury, is this, which is the inside of flesh. All right, that's actually blood vessels. This is blood. This is connective tissue all around. This is the same stuff I showed you is in here. And this was in an environment where it kept its real bloodiness, and then they put little nicks in it here and there to let out the moisture so that it would dry up. But they just sort of carved it into the putty. Now, I want to just make one mention. I did mention Brian Forrester. He's not on board with anything that I say, I don't think. But I am more or less stalking him. Because he's the only guy going out there asking the questions. He's asking questions. He's not going out making a whole bunch of statements. He says, how come the pre-Incan, or whatever it is, I'm not going to put any words in his mouth, but let's say the earliest constructions were so elegant like this, and then the later ones, they just put rocks on top of rocks. Like, this was done because it was wet. They could work it. And until we start to look at the reality of the situation that we find ourselves in with the giants and the ancient creatures that were here, it's just everybody's walking around in circles making up stories basically at this point. And I wish Brian would come along, because he's the guy that, I'm telling you, the things that I have seen. Another one that I saw about the same area where those tire tracks were was these niches they put in, and everybody said, what the hell are they doing that for? They put in these like they're windows, but they don't go anywhere. But you look in behind and it's blood red inside. Well, that's because it is blood, and they wanted to let the moisture out. I believe those niches were drying vents, basically, so that the inside could dry itself out. And that's how they would do it.